My name is Andy Jones Hamilton, and I am here today to honor the life of Dorothy Jean Kerrigan and her legacy of speaking truth to power, particularly using knowledge to speak truth to power. Dorothy Jean Kerrigan came from humble beginnings in the very racist Deep South. This led her to always use knowledge to fight racial discrimination and help advance the rights of Black and brown people. So Dorothy Jean had an amazing and incredible life. But today, I'm just going to focus on 3 topics. Number 1, her childhood and how it shaped her, where she came from. Number 2, how she got the Department of Housing and Urban Development to enact national change to help Black and brown people obtain homes. And 3, how she ultimately became the first Black professor at an all-white prestigious college in Chicago, Illinois. So, back to the beginning. Dorothy Jean Kerrigan was born in Hope, Arkansas in 1937. 1937 at that time was the height of the Great Depression. It was extremely impoverished. It had just been ravaged by a major drought and also then a major flood. In addition to that, it was extremely racist, so much so that lynchings in that state had peaked just in the late 1920s. By 2 years old, World War II had started, and Dorothy Jean's mother was a nurse, so she was a colored nurse during World War II. I'm sure that had its own personal experiences. Her father was a sign painter. He was very busy and quite successful, as during that time he was the graphic designer of his day. All signs had to be hand painted. So they did okay, but they weren't rich. They didn't have too little or too much. And there was always food on the table and books in the house. After World War II, Dorothy and her parents moved to Chicago, Illinois. They were looking for a better life and hoped that maybe things would be a little bit less racial and a little less stressful in the North. Moving forward to save some time, by 1961, Dorothy Jean was a divorced single mother of 6 kids, and she lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. She had a really good job, and she was educated, but she could not buy a house, and it was the most frustrating thing in the world to her. At the time, the Department of Housing and Urban Development did exist, and HUD, as it's called, did assist people with Section 8 housing. Basically, they would put you in the projects, and it was government subsidized, but that was as good as it was going to get. Dorothy Jean wrote a letter to President John F. Kennedy, and he actually wrote her back. To make a long story short, she was ultimately put in contact with HUD, and it didn't happen overnight. It took a couple of years, but she essentially was pretty much the very first person to receive federal assistance to actually buy a house from the federal government through the Fair Housing Act. It was her crowning moment. Anyway, so now she was happy, she had a home, her kids were doing okay, everything was great, and it was the late 60s. She'd seen a lot of racism and basically she had just become an advocate for knowledge. Then all of a sudden, the unthinkable happened. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Alabama, and it broke her heart. It changed her consciousness forever. In addition to that, riots broke out all over Chicago. There was looting, 11 people died, thousands of people were arrested. Her city was burning. It was terrible. At the exact same time, the prestigious private Elmhurst College in the suburbs of Illinois was having riots and racial problems of its own on its campus. There were 23 Black students out of 3,000 students. Those kids were tearing up the campus. They had some demands, and all they wanted was some pretty basic stuff. They wanted Black teachers at the college. There were none. They wanted classes like African American history or something that, would teach along those lines, and they wanted fair treatment. So for example, the white athletes could live for free in campus dormitory housing, but the Black athletes could not. It was unfair. So in response, the college hired 4 Black professors, 1 female, and that one was Dorothy Jean Kerrigan. I later asked her if she minded teaching rich white kids about African American studies, and she said no, because they need it. This was the type of person that my grandmother was. In conclusion, I've told you of her journey from her birth during the Great Depression in Arkansas to being a toddler during World War II, and then eventually her teaching at an all-white school, African American Studies, during the race riots of the 1960s. The lady had a pretty amazing life. I admired her, and I honor her. Thank you.